What's up, Team Spanaway? I wanted to make my guest post about recovery methods for this week because I think it's a very important topic. I want to cover this both from like a scientific perspective, like what do we think we know from the literature, but also from more of a practical application standpoint, because a lot of people will be quick to point out that there's some things that work in practical application that the literature might not support, or vice versa. So I just kind of wanted to start out by going over what do we think we know works just based on the breadth of literature out there. What do we know has an impact on our ability to recover from training? And the first one, potentially the most powerful of all of them, is really obvious and it's really low-hanging fruit, and despite that, people don't use it as a recovery tool very often, and it is the amount of work you're doing in the gym. The easiest way to control how fatigued you are is to control the amount of work you're performing in the gym. That sounds really self-explanatory, but very often people won't think to mess with that before they start messing with some more finite stuff. So that is the most potent tool we have at our disposal, is fiddling with our variables: how much volume, how much intensity, how much frequency, how many rest days we're taking. All of these things, the exercises we're selecting, all of these things are very, very powerful tools for regulating our fatigue based on issues we're having as far as recovery goes. So that's the first one. The second one's going to be sleep. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Sleep is very important for recovery. The majority of muscle mass built happens while you're sleeping. There's a lot of neurological things going on in your brain that happen while you're sleeping. More than one day in a row of poor sleep is shown to extremely inhibit performance in competitive weightlifters, and we can probably extrapolate that applies to just about anything. You're going to see that drop off in performance, and you're also going to see a drop off pretty significantly in the number of difficult sets you can handle per week, right? Don't need to dig into this one too quickly. You need to get enough sleep, right? And enough is going to vary from person to person, whether it be 6 to 9 hours, maybe even 10, depending on the person. Like anything else, it's a range, and different people need different amounts, and it's probably a bell curve. Most people fall somewhere in the middle, around that 7 to 8 hour mark, although you'll find in periods of extremely rigorous training that might even go up towards the 9. So that's the second tool we have at our disposal. The third tool we have at our disposal is nutrition. We know our ability to recover is a little bit better when we're eating at maintenance or we're eating in a slight caloric surplus. We know our ability to recover is better when we have sufficient protein within our diet. We know that our ability to recover is better if we're eating enough fat in our diet, so our hormonal levels are good. And we know our ability to recover is going to be better if you're intelligently structuring carbohydrates around your training. All of these things are important, and we know that it can be maintenance, or maybe even if you're in a caloric surplus, if you're in a bulking phase, your recovery abilities might even go up slightly past that, right? So this is another variable that we have very good control over, that's going to have a big, big impact on our ability to recover. Next, you have hydration. Usually, generally speaking, there's not a lot of good figures out there as far as how much it affects it, but if you're chronically dehydrated, your recovery capabilities are going to be impaired, more than likely. That's going to be another one. So that's 4. We have a fifth one that I think is often left off of here that does give you very good control of your recovery, is controlling your aerobic capacity. People who are in good cardiovascular shape have much better abilities to recover, not just directly after, they won't just catch their breath faster. They will physically recover better between workouts. They will be able to handle more working sets per week. So maintaining some baseline aerobic capacity is also extremely important. So maybe you find that you're like, hey, I'm not recovering from workout to workout. Sometimes the answer isn't eating more. Sometimes it's not sleeping more. Sometimes it's not doing less. Sometimes it's actually doing slightly more, but something different. Improving your aerobic capacity might just make you a more conditioned person and make you able to keep up with that workload that was otherwise excessive. So this is going to be a very powerful tool. As far as anything else, we do know that active recovery has shown to be a little bit more advantageous than passive recovery. That is, on your rest days, maybe coming in and doing really low scale exercise to stimulate blood flow has been shown to maybe be a bit better than true rest for that day, or at the very least maintaining a high NEAT. So that's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Long story short, it's just how much you move through the day. The proxy measure for this is the number of steps. So this kind of ties into condition. It's also kind of its own variable. So maintaining a high NEAT, staying on your feet, going on walks throughout the day, chasing that 10K steps, although research shows that just doing more is enough to get benefit. If you only walk 3,000 steps per day, you're going to see benefit by going to 4,000. You don't have to get to 10,000 before you start to see any benefit. So just doing something is a lot better than doing nothing. So these are going to be the variables that I am going to relay to you. In my opinion, these are the ones that are scientifically validated. There's not a whole lot of room for argument, and most people wouldn't really disagree with them practically. You're going to notice that within this list, I didn't really bring up any manual therapies such as Graston, massage, cupping, or things like sauna, contrast showers, contrast baths, cryotherapy. All of these things that are done to you, right? That is not to say that they don't work, and it's not to say that they don't have their place. A lot of people might say that, oh, if there's no scientific study definitively proving that these things work, I'm not interested. And that's okay, and that's how you can operate, right? But that being said, while the literature is not very conclusive for any of these things, and the proposed mechanisms of actions isn't even very clear, a lot of people will talk about breaking up scar tissue. I don't mean to be rude to the people that say that, but it's a fact that scar tissue is denser and more robust than your skin. So if you are applying enough force to a muscle to break up scar tissue, they're gonna be bleeding, right? So maybe there's a benefit, but that's probably not it. Maybe it has to do with circulation. There's a lot of argument that go on about, okay, well, I'm seeing an effect from this. What is it? I feel like it's not just a placebo. I'm pretty adamant it's not just a placebo, but what is it? And there's a lot of debate going on about whether it's circulatory, what's exactly going on there with these different recovery methods. That being said, an effect is still an effect. Even if it's a placebo effect, it's still an effect. And especially if they're useful for pain management, if you are training hard, if you are doing difficult training to reach a difficult goal, there are going to be aches and pains that come with that are somewhat unavoidable. This isn't to say no pain, no gain. You should be working to avoid them. You should be addressing the root causes, but it's just the fact of the matter is find me someone really strong who has achieved a really high level of fitness, who hasn't had to go through a reasonable amount of discomfort to get there, and I'll show you someone who's lying. So that being said, these things can be extremely powerful tools to help us manage the aches and pains of training. They can also be good while you work on implementing a more important change, be it workload regulation, improving your diet. You can use these things as kind of a bridge till you address it using a more long-term approach. So they're not going to be useless. I really don't think that's the takeaway here. The real takeaway is it's just like supplements, right? If you're not recovering, adding in some fancy protein powder or mass gainer more than likely won't be enough to fix it. We should look at the big variables first, right? So if you routinely aren't recovering, we should be looking at addressing that via nutrition, via sleep, or via workload regulation. Because more than likely, if you chronically are having pain due to excessive workload or a muscle being underprepared, simply getting it massaged won't be a long-term solution. You'll just have to keep getting massages. If you want to get out of pain doing that same workload, you have to better prepare for the workload, which might mean dialing back the amount of work you're doing. That being said, I think that these things can have a very key role, especially when you're preparing for a competition and you don't have the leisure of dialing back your workload. That's probably the biggest one. There's some recent studies that have shown that potentially ice baths especially might not actually aid in physiological recovery, but they can speed up the time back to performance, right? They can get you ready to perform again slightly quicker. It's not because the muscle healed as much so as your perception might be dampened. So it's not speeding up your recovery as much so as getting you ready to perform again. So if you are performing peaking phase for powerlifting, if you are getting ready for a show for strongman, you can use these things to get you to the contest. If you have one last heavy session that needs to get done, it doesn't matter how you feel. These things can be extremely powerful tools. If you have training that needs to get done prior to a certain date, using these tools to modulate your pain as you work on other factors is totally okay. I hope this helped. If you have any clarifying questions, because this is a somewhat divisive issue, feel free to tag me in the comments. All right, just going to tack on a really small clip at the end here because I forgot to mention two common physical recovery modalities that I see performed often at Spanaway that aren't necessarily scientifically validated, but might have a place. The two are going to be massage guns and foam rolling.
Neither of these are really shown to elicit much of a physiological effect at all, so they probably shouldn't be our long-term solution to a failure to recovery. If you're routinely having issues with your quads, probably going to need to look at something bigger. But if you come in and you are experiencing some minor discomfort that's interfering with your session, but you have a set workload that you need to get done, and taking a foam roller to your quad or taking a massage done to your quad allows you to perform the scheduled work and put in better quality work because you're not having to deal with pain, then more power to you. If that allows you to get the training you need to do done in a better fashion, that's absolutely a great tool. Just make sure that you don't tell yourself that foam rolling is the solution to this chronic issue you've been having. It's just a tool that you're using to get the training done while you find ways to continue to get better while addressing the more chronic issue. Didn't want to come off like I was attacking anyone.